Hello, I'm Cynthia Molobita, and I welcome you to this enticing foray into mystery and beauty and power. Power for living into existence the world that we hunger to inhabit. For this sweet hour, may we feast our spirits on the food of art, word art, poetry. May poetry open our hearts to lament and rejoice. May poetry draw forth fierce and tender courage for the living of these days. Courage to face the climate catastrophe and its deadly impacts, especially on people of color and economically impoverished people. Courage to weave webs of justice and compassion and truth-telling where falsehood and brutality torment. Here, we relish the collaboration of three feisty friends. They are the Graduate Theological Union's program in Women's Studies in Religion, the GTU's Center for the Arts and Religion, and Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary's Center for Climate Justice and Faith. Together, we bring you the remarkable scholar, activist, critic, and polylingual poet, Dr. Gabriella Gutiérrez y Muhs. She is professor in modern languages and women and gender studies at Seattle University, where she has also been honored with 2 chairs and has served as director of various programs. Gabriella is the author or editor of 8 volumes, including Chicana criticism, collections of her own poetry, and the widely acclaimed Presumed Incompetent, The Intersections of Race and Class for Women in Academia. She holds an MA and a PhD from Stanford. Professor Gutiérrez y Muhs has been invited to read her own poetry or to lecture on poetry in India, Spain, France, Switzerland, and Italy, and various countries in Central and South America, as well as Mexico. But when it comes down to it, what counts most is who a person is. This woman is one of the biggest-hearted human beings that I know. Mentoring students, celebrating people, creating and sharing sumptuous Mexican meals at all hours of day and night, opening her home to folks in transit, standing up for people being attacked by institutional racism, and more. Her office, 2 doors down from mine for a number of years at Seattle University, constantly had a stream of students seeking her counsel. On a very personal level, she is one of my dearest friends from Seattle University. I vividly recall dancing the night away at a tenure party that she insisted on throwing for me. Well, before we throw ourselves into this hour and her art, please note also that part 2 of this series will be April 22nd on Earth Day, when we will be challenged and guided and delighted by the local dance artist, KJ Dalo. Stay tuned. And now, please welcome Professor Gabriella Gutiérrez y Muhs.
Like a crab that sideways, loosing a leg aimlessly, conjugating its soul in languages unknown to itself, the country at large parades its blemished, infantile-like consciousness. People waving flags disclose handicapped nationalism, like a SARS virus outside of China. No flag to hold it. Demonstrations of 30,000 gagged by the suave media camouflage. We stand guilty pioneers to the world in the long line of forgiveness we still don't understand. We stand guilty pioneers to the world in the long line of forgiveness we still don't understand. Our sins hang on pins from the clothesline of the equator, and the latitudinally palpitating xenophobia in our country smears, storms the air with fractured Parcheesi-like ladders that held us to ignorance. Our questions-filled country, held back several years from graduating grammar school. Our credit cards boneless, our stoic cars filled with the dark juice of forgetfulness, our souls unleashed to someone else's guilt, vergüenza ajena, our tears for rent to higher bidders of pain. Our sins hang on pins from the clothesline of the equator. There's no place unread by time, deciphered by education, where one can hide. There's no place where palms can be read by past events, where books will no longer embrace you, letters hug you, sentences whisper to you. You have encountered yourself on paper. It was your destiny in your learning of life to find your passion on the bark of a tree. It's all a spiral of knowledge, yet an unending and undeciphered letter to write your life. Before you lose the ocean. Hello, everyone. Hello. Hi. Can you hear me now? Yes, wonderful. Okay. Trying to pull from my screen my poem from behind you. I'm so happy to be here, and I've joined you before. I might have met some of you a couple of years ago. I visited. I'm so grateful for this new center, and I wanted to read a poem first before I begin. I wanted to begin by saying hello to Cynthia. I know she's not here, but now she can watch the recording. Cynthia Molabita. And I wanted to thank her for the lovely introduction. I must honor her by reading this poem that appears in my album, Frontera Dogs. If you like the poem that you just watched, there are many poems like this on YouTube that you're welcome to use in your classrooms. You can either download through Bandcamp It's only $7 for all the poems, or you can get them free one by one in YouTube. So if there's anything of mine that you can use in your classes, I'm very happy. I started this poem that I'm going to read now the day I found out that Cynthia was leaving us in Seattle to come be among you. She was not only my neighbor at school, as she explained, she was my neighbor at home. We both lived in Ballard a few years ago. I know she has continued to bloom down there, and you're so lucky to have her, as she could give so many more talks about this topic, the intersections of gender and climate justice, than most of us. So I was very excited, challenged, moved that she would, of course, ask me to do this. She's the author of the most renowned Resisting Structural Evil, and also Healing a Broken World. So I recommend that you look at her books and articles if you haven't. And she's the author of many, many articles. And above all, she's one of the women I most admire in this very small world. And I celebrate her today, and I celebrate all of you. I'm so glad we're here and that I'm doing something special for this day. Very important. It shouldn't be one day, it should be every day that we do this. The name of the poem that I wrote for her is called Sustainable Panacea. This city is cruel without you. The city knows your bombs, the medicine of amistad. Like an eraser sketch pad, your voice nurtures my life, effaces the wrong, ablates pain. The city is cruel without you. Homeopathy is yet unknown for suffering matters. You are the manzanilla, hierba buena of my essence. They do not have page numbers for this healing. Your remedies are touch. There's no bibliographic entry for the details of your love. They constitute your pain erase around my life. No pill will be sold to replace aspirin because of you. Filial love has other possibilities today. This city is cruel without you. When I thought rain was God's tears, it made me sad. But you told me that rain was life and to let it drop upon my face. The city is cruel without you, I know. By having Cynthia as the director of several of your programs, your instructor, your mentor, you are soon to be friends, more privileged than most you are. There are so many topics to broach today. Talking about these intersections that address climate is what I call climating, and that is the title of my talk today. Climating, in my mind, is divided into 5 categories. You may divide yours up differently. These are my divisions. Environmental climate, and at this stage, I think that's clear to all. Professional climate. I am first editor of Presumed Incompetent and co-editor of the 2nd volume. I won't give you the subtitles because they're long, because this issue is so important to me. And my books tell the stories of women of color and working class women, because this is essential and hasn't really been told before. Their agencies, their resilience, as they face this still ivory tower in our universities and in our institutions at large. Then there's the personal, that's the home climate. There's the creative climate, writing climate, artistic climate. I think we all have some of that. Some people say, oh no, I'm not a, a poet. I think we all are poets and we all are artists, but we haven't believed that. And there's, of course, a psychological, emotional, mental, and social climate. I put all these three categories in one, but it depends. You're welcome to separate them. If you have a person with mental illness in your home, however, this takes a lot of your time. And if you have a person with other physical challenges or diseases, that might truly affect your home climate. Life is about balance. I believe that all those types of climates contribute to our state of being. I cannot be or feel well when something is wrong with any of these climates. We immediately are able to tell that we don't feel well if our colleagues do not treat us well, or if the place we work at thinks that our contributions are not important, valuable for whatever reason. Our lives are intersectional. You cannot choose what subjectivity is more important than another. For a long time, Mexican Americans like me, Chicanos, had to choose what they were, that they were more American than Mexican. But we all know that is impossible, as we cannot prioritize subjectivities, identities. They are all layered parts of ourselves that exist together. We know that if our partner goes to bed upset at us, it is hard to fall asleep, and that affects the next day for us personally and professionally. It is difficult for me to write something hopeful when I have a big argument with my sons or my husband or a very close friend. We are truly a vessel that needs all of the chemicals in our body to get along. We often go to counseling, have meetings, write poems, exercise, or eat ice cream to take care of ourselves and forget the fifth bucket, or hope to forget about our fifth bucket, the environment and climate change, because we feel frustrated in this regard. Greta sings in our minds. Her rightfully accusing eyes remind us that the boat is sinking, so to speak, and that the glaciers are melting while we use too much electricity, gasoline, fly too often, and drive when we can walk. However, we must join the revolution of the everyday. In the back burner is our planet often. We can no longer leave our environmental climate in the back burner because we often feel that we can only have a very small impact on the environment. Even though we might be vegetarians, recycle, reuse, walk, not go to Mars, and yet sometimes we're exhausted. I'm asking you to never be exhausted about your contribution to the amelioration of climate change as we know it today. Climate work should be as normalized as washing our clothes, brushing our teeth, drinking water, eating, washing our hands after we go to the bathroom, wearing a mask during COVID, absolutely a part of our behavior. I'm not going to speak today about the environment, although for me as well as for you, that is an issue I work on every day by taking the bus, by choosing the right kind of plastic that produces green carbon instead of fossil carbon. I look at the sources of the type of carbon I consume as a consumer of electricity, have solar heating at home, and use rainwater to flush my toilets, although that might not be legal. I use biodiesel in my car, have driven a hybrid, and so on, so on. You know all those things, and you're tired sometimes when people start talking about them. There are so many experts on these areas that I don't want to touch them. You can find many videos on YouTube about that. What I simply want to make clear is that when our climate deteriorates, there are other consequences that might not affect us in our current lives, but we are interlinked. When people are unemployed, it is usually women who suffer from domestic violence and hunger, and their children as well. But I can talk about my own experiences and dispel some beliefs about the other for many. I am the daughter, granddaughter, great-granddaughter of people who worked the earth to produce food. My mother knew everything about growing corn, raising cattle, making cheese. And she often said, all each family needed in this country was 2 cows. That was her evaluation of how American life was wrong. She was very displeased. She just passed away a couple of years ago. Very displeased at the land distribution and the use of golf courts, which she really wanted to eliminate. I grew up knowing dirt was one of our treasures and one of our major sources of food and love. I grew up playing with dirt tortillas. My mother's and my dolls were ajolotes, the little pre-Columbian animals that still exist, both in water and on land. We would dress them in fancy outfits and take them for baths in their home, the river. The rivulets, really, very, very little water where they lived. I will tell you a story about the personal and how important and how much the personal is really the political human. I was born into a family of Mexican farm workers and migrants. My family has commuted between Mexico and the US for generations because in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even now, they closed the migrant camps in California and we were not allowed to live in them from October to March. My parents had to go to Mexico and live either on the border where my mother cleaned houses for $1 a day and took care of people dying of cancer. And after taking several buses home, arrived with a little square of Philadelphia cream cheese and 10 cents of $1 to feed my sister and I in Juarez. Unemployment for men in border cities is often outrageous. They hire women in the maquilas, mostly in all the factories on the border. My father would go by himself and work in packing sheds that were open in the winter in Wisconsin, Indiana, or California, forced to sleep in the car often. He could not rent a hotel room. They would not rent to him, even if he could have afforded it. The internet back then was sleeping on the floor of a friend's home, usually a rented, dilapidated apartment that they rented to immigrants and migrants or people with children. And arriving unexpected to not always happy hosts. If he could not find work at a car wash or somewhere in El Paso, he would be away from us all winter, and then maybe we would rejoin him in California or Texas to live again in camps that were really horrendous, frankly, cold, badly kept, subhuman. It was really Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta who raised the entire country's consciousness about pesticides in this country from the 60s to the 80s. When the farm workers first spoke about their children getting asthma, bathing in pesticides, things changed only a little. And I do remember bathing in pesticides. I know that most women my age, most of my friends are not alive. They died in their 40s, in their early 50s, because we used to be exposed, like when they helicoptered all of the pesticides onto the trees. We were there and nobody told us, don't be here. So I'm afraid I'm alive by the glory of God and very happy to be here. As writer Elena Maria Viramontes notes, it was only when people understood through demonstrations and other boycotts that this would also affect the consumer who ate the grapes, that middle-class moms mobilized to boycott because they were afraid it would affect their health, as it has. So many women have died of breast cancer and all types of other cancers. It was many years earlier, Mexican women were shouting and no one was listening. Our children are being born with medical conditions, without limbs, etc. My mother was one of these women affected by the pesticides she ate while being pregnant. She had a son, my brother, who was born in pain with spina bifida and other complications and would have never walked had he lived. And fortunately, he died as a baby. So after this, our entire family became affected by this loss and this impotence, this depression, this inequity, this loss of hope. The reason my brother died was because he could not get an operation he needed in order to survive, because we as migrant farm workers had no insurance and could not afford it and were turned away immediately. In poor communities, stories like this of need that has affected entire families are the daily bread, as my mother would say. This incident made my father feel useless and my mother feel very angry and frustrated because they both worked at least 12 hours a day to put food on the table in this country, but could not afford to live here in the winter. This is where the implacable break began in my family. And it was the result of my mother working throughout her pregnancy on the line, standing for 12 hours at a time. But it is these stories that also made me strong and resilient. I believe that all of you in this meeting, I don't know what to call it, in this Zoom meeting room could make significant changes to our lives if you're conscious about these 5 types of climate and know that in order to make definite changes to climate change, we need to be committed every day of our lives. Because this not only affects us and our children, but because this affects millions of poor people who do not have the privileges we have. The privilege you have to be able to study and write reports, proposals, grants, articles that can change the way that people look at climate change. I'm married to a scientist. I have ran by him all sorts of solutions to prevent glaciers from melting. He has done the math and laughed at the scale at which I'm thinking. We have laughed together. Every day I wake up with a new solution as to how we can freeze glaciers again. An example of my dream is if every human being committed to taking water from the committed by taking water from the ocean, so that our islands in the South Pacific, the Marshalls, the Solomon Islands, and Kiribati, which we're about to watch a very short video about that. If we could all take some water, right? Then we could stop. They will not sink, they will not drown. I believe we could lift those islands out of the water. So I watched this movie and I couldn't sleep for days after watching it. All these beautiful little children and how the island is sinking. I'm not an engineer. I know little about building any type of structure. But one night I dreamt an enormous building-like structures, plastic jugs made out of that plastic that you can't see through, that thick plastic, right? Recycled plastic, that we could keep balanced over the ocean, full of seawater, up to the last floor, keeping the water levels in the plastic tanks above the water and the levels off the ocean. And they were not going to drown. I can dream, create, and mostly make engineers conscious of my desperation. This might work. And the other solution I had, for example, was that all these countries like Bolivia that have no access to water, that we could help them build saltwater lakes. Anyway, I know you have your own dreams, and but I just wanted to give you some examples. Today, I want to talk to you about all the power and privilege you have, as I've mentioned, through your education. This is why I became a PhD. I was already a poet, but I knew that I needed my PhD to be listened to. And we can all educate people as we ride the bus, as we go to church. We can preach and share. We can invent and distribute, disseminate faith, disseminate hope, disseminate ourselves to the world. But writing is a good way of doing it. We think we know so much more, and I hope that from my presentation you will remember this part, because we think in general. I don't believe this nation has ever dealt with its chip on its shoulder, which is poverty. Nobody wants to say that they come from poor people, and everybody almost. I mean, there's very few rich people. But the reality is that in poor immigrant communities, we have, for example, been recycling since our birth. I remember taking all the aluminum foil wrapped around my free lunch home for my mother to use on her lunch. The plastic that they covered our brownies, also taking that home so they could reuse it. My mother did not buy special planting pots to grow serranos on our ledges. She used a can of El Pato sauce on which she would make holes at the bottom with a hammer and a nail to drain the extra water. She bought outdated shoes for us that were way too big and cut off at the front so we could wear them just our size. And food was never wasted because we did not like it. There was one thing to eat or not. Clothes were bought thinking of the possibilities of handing them down to other people. And we never threw anything away. We gave it to someone who could use it. This was often because when we traveled, everyone could only take one pillowcase full of whatever they desired. And then we would give away the rest. I lost my place. So don't ever feel sorry for people who have less possessions than you, because they might have skills they developed, skills of resilience and strength and adaptability as a result that maybe you do not possess. But you can learn from them. I think one of my biggest problems is how much we feel sorry for people who have less than us, who grew up. I never knew I was poor until I was in college, and I met people with checkbooks. I'd never seen a checkbook in my life, and I went to Occidental College, and I worked. I worked since I was 13. I worked as a little girl in the fields as well. I was a child field worker, but I'm saying to get a check, but I never knew that I could have a checkbook until I saw the people I went to college with at Occidental writing checks to go skiing. And I was like, what is this world coming to? But nonetheless, I just know that all of us can make, the lives of thousands, maybe millions of people better. To say that the most affected people by overpopulation, climate change, and oligarchies, which we now are close to having in this country or have, are the poor, and especially women, children, and the elderly, as well as immigrants, is not an exaggeration. So I'm gonna show you a little poem I wrote yesterday and talk about poetry a little bit. That's been my therapy. When I was a little girl, I used to write. My mom would be very upset because we were migrant, and of course I ruined the shoes because nobody wanted them with writing in the instep. But I didn't stop, and then as I grew older, it's just part of my life. This is called Fishing, and I wrote it and I translated it. So I'll read it. It's only 3 lines. I'll read it both in English and Spanish. That Spanish is for Cynthia. I know she does speak Spanish. Maybe others of you do. She speaks beautiful Spanish. I love how everything she does, she delves totally into it. And I learned so much by being close to her. I learned so much from Cynthia. Fishing. Cast your nets wide in your new paradigm. May it not be fish you catch. That's it. I just wanted to show one of my favorite poems ever is by Bernice Zamora, Chicana poet. She's probably 20 years older than me. She wrote, Not to be Modeled is the name or the title of the poem, and it's only 4 lines. You insult me when you say I'm schizophrenic. My divisions are infinite. So I wanted to show you that short poems are important poems. Pescando. Lanza tu red de par en par en tu nuevo paradigma. Que no sea pescado lo que pescas. That was a translation. Now, I didn't do something. Somehow I missed doing this that I wanted to do. I gave you the climating, the 5 types of climate and that I believe every human needs to really thrive, right? And I've made I asked for there to be paper, but I didn't realize, of course, I'm always thinking like a teacher, right? It's like everybody has their own paper, right? I can't believe I did that. I asked Cheryl, there has to be paper there, blank paper for them to do a pie chart. I did mine. You can barely see it on there, but I did want to show you. So I want to take 1 minute so that we can do that. And take this home. I like for people to take something home, or keep it at home if you're at home. As your work today on yourself, right? So how much time, how much importance, how much depth, how is this pie is your whole life, right? So what do you dedicate to environmental justice, I'm not, my husband is very good. He does a lot of the solar energy work. But what do you do? Do you take out the trash? Do you recycle? That takes time. I know it's exhausting sometimes for me. We have 5 people in my home right now. So how much environmental work do you do to upkeep your Prius? What about your professional environment? How do you get along with other people? Are you expecting for them to get along with you? How much work do you do for them to know you and care for you and for your well-being? So what do you do to improve your professional climate? What about your creative, your social climate? Do you entertain other people? Do you feed them? Are you creative? Of course you are. For me, the day that I write a poem, I'm so happy. It's like nothing can take that away from me. Yesterday that I wrote, and the day before I wrote another poem for our presentation at the end, but I wrote that fishing poem yesterday, and I was like, I was the queen of the home, right? So this is also nourishing for us, right? Especially now that we're at home. What are we doing for ourselves? We need creativity. How do I nourish myself? I have to listen to Mexican songs. I put on all this, from classical to very eclectic, all the music my mother loved, to Frank Sinatra, because I love Frank Sinatra. And I listen, and that nourishes me. And then I write my poems. It's like, what do you need? Because I know you are creative. You are an artist, a painter, you draw, you do something, you do collages. Find something. Make earrings out of Fimo. But what time do you dedicate to nourish your creative self? Very important. For me, that's probably a quarter of my circle. Because if I don't do that, I'm not a good person. Under the creative and the social, that could be your church, could be many other things. So you have your pies with your 5 categories. Does anybody want to share? Environmental, personal home climate. If you live in a group home, do you clean up after yourself? Do you clean up after others? Are you educating other people? That's also work. Your creative climate, your psychological climate. I don't necessarily believe that people need a therapist. I don't. But I believe we all need friends. And I think so many times when you go to some of the Latin American countries, you learn so much about why they don't counselors are not as popular over there. And it's because everything is out. If you're talking about a topic in Cuba or Mexico, families spend 3 or 4 hours talking about whatever, abortion, talking about the balseros that leave Cuba, you know, they'll exhaust every possible thing, every possible way of leaving Cuba. The neighbor will, you know, contribute. We talk about these things, the things that bother us. And so I hope you have, especially right now in self-care, that you're taking care. Self-care is not always taking baths and getting your nails done, you know? It really bothers me, all those things that women are supposed to do. It's like, no, I don't want that. You are not going to do that to my body. But it's other things. For me, it's caring for others. For me, it's I make hot chocolate 3 times a week, Mexican hot chocolate, for my children, and I make sure we have something nice 2 or 3 times a week. That's my self-care, because I'm the one who cares about that. Right? You have questions, so I hadn't. Yeah, of course, I take questions. Someone.
Well, you asked the question of, anybody wanted to share their pie chart, and
yes, I do. I was just making sure that you have all the ingredients, the 5. Yes, please do.
And,
let's move on.
What I found is, I tried to start doing the pie chart, and I wanted to do one of those diagrams that has all the circles interlocking. Because so much of my, because they overlock, interlink so much, because I'm, I do poetry and art quilting and liturgical art with people, with, family, and I give it to family. And so there's, and I put environmental and all kinds of different environmental issues, into my artwork, my poetry and my quilting, and, in my church, and so it's more like there's all these circles running into each other.
That's fine. That's called the interstice, where 2 circles or 2 squares share. The mathematical term is that space in between, right? That we both, that's how we feel as immigrants, as Mexican Americans. There's this two circles that intersect, and that interstitial space is where a lot of us live. It doesn't have to be separate. Absolutely. That's a wonderful point. Yes. Thank you for sharing. Someone else? Were you surprised? I was surprised by mine, but yes, go ahead, Julie. Yeah.
I had the same thing where they were kind of bleeding into each other. So I gave a color to each category.
Oh,
The bubble
smart.
of the color.
Smart.
And then I realized that they bleed into each other. Because I was picturing more like the colors fade into each other. But they still kind of have their own section. But then it's also like each one, like every time I'm doing one thing, I'm bringing all the other parts of my life into it.
That's great. Someone else, were there any surprises? I like surprises.
I think for me, I was just surprised by the variety of creative practices that I've incorporated over the course of the pandemic, and the way in which, living by myself and having so much time to myself has opened up more space for painting and poetry and music making, probably much to the chagrin of my neighbors, as well as baking, and the ways in which baking is also a way to connect with other people.
Absolutely. And baking is also so many things, right? Psychological, home. Yeah, I like the baking example. We could really do a crossword puzzle with that one. I have so much fun. Well, I had I have like 5 minutes. I hope can we go longer, or I'm willing to go a little bit longer, or does it have to end in 4 minutes?
Yeah, some people might have to leave, but I guess one of the benefits of being on Zoom is you can certainly do that when you need to go.
I don't
And we do have some closing words as well to hopefully fit
I
in.
also want people to write something. So that's what we're doing next. How are you doing? Do you have questions before people leave? Like, is there something that you said, why is this woman talking about this and that? And, you know, I wanna answer your questions, definitely. Yes. If someone wants to speak, no? I'm trying to close a window that's in front of you. Any other questions? Please just speak up.
Can you put the titles of your book or your website in the chat for us, please?
The titles of my book. I have many books, but I'll send them a link to Amazon, but we will post this or give you a link to this. I also wanted to give you a link, and I was gonna play this, but of course it's already been an hour and we just winked, right? About the Church Forests of Ethiopia. And we don't have time, it's like 15 minutes, but I'll send you that. And I hope that you will watch that, because it's so, I wrote like 3 poems after watching that it's really the church forests in Ethiopia that have kept a lot of the flora and fauna there. And they've been dialectic and diachronic, and they've fed each other. And it's really beautiful, a beautiful video that I just watched. It's very new, but I'll send you the link to that one because we really needed like 2 or 3 hours. But I do want to get you started on a poem. And I wanted to give you that example for that little poem. But I'm going to give you a prompt, and you can use it or not. But I want to make sure that in the next 3 minutes, you write a poem, because that's what it takes. And it could be just you writing some notes for a poem in the future, but I don't want you to stop writing for 3 minutes. The poem that that Cheryl's gonna play at the end, which is a poem that is in my Frontera dogs, which I will also send you the link to that. It's basically on YouTube. You put my name, there's many, many poems there. I have thousands of reasons. That's the prompt. But you will only hear one.